Hey, everybody. I am Dr. Andy Roark, and this is the Uncharted Podcast. Guys, I am here today with Dr. Gene Bauer. He is a medical director at a 6-vet AHA accredited practice and also a business development specialist at Blue River Pet Care. And we are getting all up in the idea of what's it like when the practice that you're working at gets sold and you go along for the journey. And that's what Gene, he has done that. He has been in a practice that was sold and he stayed around and became the medical director. And now he advises other practices that are going through this transition with Blue River Pet Care. And he is a funny guy and an interesting guy. And this is just a really cool conversation about the nuts and bolts of a practice changing ownership and what that looks like for the medicine people who are in it. And so I know a lot of people are going to really like this episode. A lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. Changes in ownership in the business that you work in, it's stressful and there's a lot of unknowns. And so this is kind of a life raft for those people in that stormy sea. And I really like what Gene's got to say. So anyway, guys, this episode is made possible by Blue River Pet Care. Let's get into it.
And now, the Uncharted Podcast.
And we are back. It's me, Dr. Andy Roark, and my friend, Dr. Gene Bauer. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Andy. It's great to meet you. Thanks for having me on your show.
I am glad to have you on the show. So, here at Uncharted, we obviously get a lot of questions about where am I going in my business? Where am I going in my career? What does it look like to sell my practice? What does it look like to be a part of a practice that gets purchased? And I think you're an interesting person to talk about this, and that's why I wanted to have you on. You are the medical director at a 6-veterinarian AHA accredited practice, and also you are a business development specialist at Blue River Pet Care. You were at the first hospital that Blue River Pet Care acquired. Tell me that story.
Yeah, the origin story, as I like to say, Andy. You're exactly right. I joined my current practice in roughly 2003, so I've been there almost 22 years. And at the time, it was owned by a veterinarian. I'd worked there roughly 7 years, and I got a phone call from my then boss. He said, Gene, I need to let you know, I sold the practice yesterday to a company in Chicago called Blue River Pet Care. They seem like nice guys. I think they're going to take care of you, and best of luck to you and the team.
And he was gone?
Fairly shortly after. And it was a unique scenario, and we can get into that later. But obviously, that's a little bit unusual. Typically, selling owners will stay on for some period of time. But in this particular case, that was the news. As you can imagine, it created some anxiety. And
what was your reaction with it? Like, so he sits you down and he's like, hey, it was done. He was like, I sold the practice. And again, that is how most people find out. Like, most people are not included in the decision. When the team finds out or the associates find out, it's usually over. So that's not unusual, but you get that message. What were your first thoughts?
Yeah, that's correct. So it was actually a phone call, and it was a phone call on a Sunday, which was highly unusual. I rarely got phone calls from work, and I was driving with my wife at the time, and we talked about it the whole ride home. And I said, I don't know what this is going to mean. Maybe we'll have to move. Am I going to have a job? I mean, those are the thoughts that you have at a very basic level.
Yeah.
And some of that, Andy, stemmed from, I had friends and colleagues who had worked for various companies, and candidly, some of them may have had less positive experiences. And so my perception was, I'm not sure if this is going to be a good thing or not. And
of course, yeah.
So those were our initial feelings.
You're sort of having these feelings. I think that level of uncertainty is totally understandable. Again, there's different people involved. Every situation is different. You can't know what this is going to be like. And so I'm assuming you decided to give it a try for a while. Is it like, did you do anything else? Was there anything that you did to prepare yourself for these unknown changes?
So shortly after the message was delivered, we were informed, hey, we're all going to get together, and the founders of Blue River Pet Care are going to sit down with us all, introduce themselves. That's what's now come to be known as the town hall meeting.
Okay.
And so Dan and Roy, who are the two founders who I know that you've spoken to before, they sat us down as a practice team. And they said, look, we know you guys are freaking out. Anytime there's change, there's going to be some trepidation, some anxiety. We want to introduce ourselves. We want to tell you what we're trying to build here. And the reason that your former boss wanted to partner with us is because we made promises to him that we were going to keep the culture that you've created intact.
Okay.
And they sort of walked us through, here are the things that we promised we're never going to change. And we can get into that if you want to. And then here are some things that will change being part of a larger organization. And we're hoping that a lot of these things are going to be sort of net positives for you guys. And the sort of the closing remark, if you will, Andy, was them saying, look, all we can really do is ask for you to give us an opportunity to earn your trust. And if we can't do that, we should probably be doing something else. You know, if you like working here today, you should like working here next month, 6 months from now, 10 years from now. It shouldn't have anything to do with us. And so I came away thinking, you know what? They seem like genuinely good human beings, which now I know 15 years later is in fact the truth. They're great people and they've kept all the promises they made. But I did decide at that point, Andy, I'm going to stick this out. I've been here 7 years. I've grown my clientele. You know, I'm having people ask to see me, and that feels good.
You're invested. Yeah.
I don't want to pull the ripcord. So let's see what happens.
What were the things that you remember that they said they were not going to change?
First and foremost, I think the most important thing that doesn't change with a partnership with Blue River are the people themselves. Part of their message was, look, your clients come in here because you provide exceptional client service and you practice excellent medicine. We don't want to change any of you because that's the special sauce, you know, this culture that you've built. So in an effort to ensure a smooth transition, we're not going to change the practice software that you use. We're not going to change the lab services. And somewhat importantly, I think, and kind of a differentiator between Blue River and some of the other owner-operators out there is you're going to buy the drugs and supplies from who you want to. Your local representatives have developed relationships with you. They're the ones that come in and do lunch and learns. And if all of a sudden they said, hey, you're going to get all of your products from X, Y, or Z, then those relationships would be over. And their thought process and ours now as an organization is those relationships do have value. And so we're going to preserve them as much as possible.
You go through this process. So you decide we're going to give them a chance. We're going to see how it goes. What went well and what did not go well?
What went really well, honestly, was that initial meeting, you know, because everybody had built up so much anxiety and had so many questions. And they literally would answer any questions. We get a pretty good discount on bringing our pets here. Is that going to change? And the answer is no, that's not going to change. We've looked and seen what your pet discount looks like, and that's going to remain intact. So the initial relationships start. I think because in the answer to your second part of your question, Andy, what didn't go well, I think that because the company was in its infancy, maybe we hadn't ironed out everything from a financial transition standpoint. You know, people had questions about where do I find info about these benefits that I have access to and so on and so forth, or how do I request PTO? In the past 15 years, I can tell you that we've become a lot more sophisticated as an organization. And I think that's one of our strong suits is our transition team is pretty exceptional now.
So you go through this. How long did that anxiety last? So it fully makes sense to me. You have this town hall meeting. The people who made the acquisition, they come in, they seem genuine. They sort of talk to you. It's nice that they were like, we're not going to really change these things. You can count on these things not changing. I can't imagine that everyone went home at the end of the day like, well, we were so silly to be worried. Tell me about that period of like, what does the move towards acceptance look like? How long did it kind of take? And just in general terms of like, before people were like, well, I guess this is kind of what it is now.
It was a while ago, but maybe a few weeks. And when we have a town hall, it's fairly close to when the actual financial closing of the sale is. And I think probably when there was that sigh of relief was when the actual closing happened. And all that is a financial transfer, as you know. It's really pretty unremarkable. You know, nothing really happens. And sort of it was almost like Y2K, if you remember that. Oh, this big thing is going to happen. And then the next day you wake up and you're like, you know what? We're just here in the same place doing the same thing, which we've enjoyed doing for many years. So let's just keep doing it.
It's amazing to me how quickly people can get over things like that. You can only be so nervous for so long when you're like, well, I guess this is it. And then you sort of start to move towards acceptance. Let's say for a second that I was an associate vet and I'm at a 6-7 vet hospital and the practice owner comes in tomorrow and says, hey, you know, we'll make this transition. We're going to be selling. There's going to be new ownership. What advice generally do you have for me? I'm going to have the same thoughts you do. Am I going to have a job? What's it going to be like? Everything's going to change. What would you say to me?
Yeah, so I think the first message is, having now been through this process over 200 times with it being part of Blue River, is try to keep an open mind. I think it's important to take a deep breath, gather information, and then figure out sort of how you feel about the situation. The other thing that I think is very reasonable to do would be to ask for resources. Are there people that I can reach out to that work in some of the practices that are owned by company X, Y, or Z that I can have a candid conversation with? I think that's a little bit different, Andy, than asking for sort of a list of recommendations. I actually prefer, like, if you know of a practice that's owned by the company that you're partnering with, just pick up the phone and call and ask to speak with one of the veterinarians, somebody in a similar position to yourself, and say, hey, how did it go? What should I watch out for? Is there anything that I should be concerned or excited about?
Do you mean that's literally in that, like, I would be like, oh, well, I know this, Jonesville Animal Hospital is owned, and I'm going to call and the front desk and I say, I guess I'm imagining, look at the about page. Do you have a veterinarian that's available to talk to me? Something like that?
So I'll tell you a funny story, Andy. You probably already know this, but if you go to our website at Blue River Pet Care, we list all of our practices on there and encourage people to reach out to them. That's, I think, one of the things that's helped us to build a very positive reputation.
That's pretty cool.
So we were partnering with a practice that shall remain nameless, and one of the associates was that anxious, had a lot of trepidation about what was going to happen, and literally started going down the list on the website, calling. I'll have to check the math here, but it was something like 20 to 25 practices. He just kept calling them, trying to find somebody to say something negative about how this transition went. And finally, he gave up and he called one of us and said, you know what? I think everything's going to be okay.
If one person had been like, this is bad, he would have been like, I knew it. Yeah. That's pretty incredible. I like this exercise. Let's keep going here. Let's just say that I'm in this practice. It's been acquired. I'm like, all right, great. I found another location. I'm going to call them. I'm going to talk to one of the vets there. What are the questions that you would ask? I mean, you're a vet. You know what vets sort of care about. What are the questions for the person who's going along for the ride? Like, what would they want to know?
What are the potential benefits of being part of this larger entity? And I can't speak for any other company because I've obviously worked for this one for 15 plus years, but will I have access to maybe educational opportunities that I wouldn't have access to otherwise? Are there opportunities for professional growth within my current position? Could I potentially become medical director of the practice when ultimately the selling owner wants to transition out altogether? Because those are, obviously, from a benefit standpoint, having, as Blue River does, a fully sort of fleshed out continuing education program is a huge benefit. But having the ability to, if you want to, step into more of a leadership role within your practice, if you love working there, you want to continue to grow that practice and the culture, there are real financial benefits to being medical director. Historically, it was thought, well, the only way to secure your financial future is to own a practice. And that's just not the case anymore. There are real significant opportunities within the practice that you're already working in.
Are there questions that you have found that generally aren't helpful? Are there questions that you say, I understand why you're asking this, but it doesn't tend to give you the information you want? Is anything like that you've come across?
A reasonable question is there anything that's going to change operationally about our practice? Candidly, there are some more heavy-handed consolidators that are out there that may want to do things like expand hours or open on Sunday. So I don't think that's an unreasonable question. Are the practice hours going to be similar to what they are? Are they going to be the same? Is my day-to-day life going to change in any meaningful way?
Do you get associate vets, when you guys will acquire practice and they're coming on board, who say, I would like to be a medical director someday, or I would like to have a leadership opportunity? Like, do they say that directly to you? And if so, like, how do you receive that? What does that say about them?
I'd say we do occasionally. I think more frequently, Andy, we'll have a conversation. We usually have several conversations with the selling owner leading up to a transition. And they will help us identify somebody, that they've seen these people interact with one another and who within this team has that leadership capability. Sometimes the answer is none of them. Sometimes that's a very honest answer, and we may need to recruit somebody who wants to step into that role, which can be a challenge, as you know. But our preference is we would prefer somebody that understands the existing culture of the practice, step into that leadership role, and enjoy that growth opportunity.
At Blue River right now, you said when your practice was acquired, the practice owner didn't stay around at all, but as the norm, they generally usually are. How long are practice owners sort of staying at Blue River now?
A little bit dependent on the selling owner themselves, Andy. And as you can imagine, it would depend on how productive that veterinarian is. Some selling owners have been very intentionally decreasing their workload as they get closer to that transition, which is certainly helpful. But if they're fairly productive, we may ask them to stay on for a little bit longer period of time. But on average, it's 1 to 3 years.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What is the practice owner's journey like during this time? So let's say that I own the practice and I say, hey, I'm gonna make this transition. I plan to be here for, I don't know, let's just say that I'm getting towards retirement age. I'm gonna stick around for 2 or 3 years. How much does my life change, and what are the things that you would say to the practice owner who has made this commitment? They've made the sale, and they're not out the door yet, and so they're kind of in this. How do you make it not feel like an awkward limbo period?
That's a great question. And, our goal is that partnership be net positive. We're very upfront about what we're going to be able to provide for the practice team. And the selling owner is hopefully very upfront that I'm going to continue to provide leadership in this practice for the amount of time that I'm contractually obligated to do so. Sometimes we're partnering with a practice where the owner started it 15 or 20 years ago. And as you know, they're immersed day to day more in the business side of things than they are in the practicing medicine side of things. So one of the real advantages is it gives them an opportunity to go back to why they went to vet school in the first place, so we can take all of that sort of back office burden off of their plate. And so we hope that those remaining 1 to 3 years are, hey, I'm gradually working less. I don't have to worry about making payroll. I don't have to worry about who's paying the bills because somebody else is doing all that. And I don't have to negotiate healthcare costs because it's not my problem anymore.
Yeah. I want to swing this back around to you and sort of your journey here for a second. So here you were. How experienced of a veterinarian were you? How many years had you been in practice when your practice was purchased?
So I graduated in 99, and then the transition was 2010. So I'd been out for 11 years. I felt like I knew what I was doing. Sometimes I still feel that way. It depends on when you ask me.
Right.
I think what you're getting at is, so shortly after that transition took place, well, the first thing that happened, Andy, was Dan and Roy said, hey, would you like to be medical director? Do you want to be the next sort of face of the practice? And I said, well, I don't know what that means. Like, would I make
Good answer.
Would I make more money? And they said, well, yeah, actually you would. And so I said, well, I guess you have a medical director and we'll sort of figure out what that means. And I did, sort of learn how to be a leader within the practice and deal with conflict management and have open discussions with staff members and so on and so forth. But a couple of years in, I don't know what you're like in a practice, Andy, when you're seeing patients, but I tend to like to converse with my clients. I mean, I've been there now 22 years. I've seen their families grow up, and I just love talking to them. I have lots of interesting people that come and bring their pets to me. And so I'm always fascinated. I'm asking them, well, what do you do? Or where's your daughter going to college? I've just always been curious. And I think I was the same way with Dan and Roy. They were growing this company, and I was curious about, how does this big thing work? What are you trying to build here? And Roy eventually said, well, look, I've got some meetings scheduled in Maryland, which is where I live and practice. He said, why don't you come with me? And you can see how these conversations go with potential selling owners. And so we did. And what was interesting, Andy, was the potential selling owners they had more questions for me than they did for Roy. What's going to happen? I've built this thing for the last 15 years. What's going to happen to my people? This is my second family. What does the transition look like? And so as soon as we got out of the car, he's dropping me off and he said, we need to get you on the road talking to people.
Are there any practices that stand out in your mind as being ones that were either particularly interesting for you to work with, or where you were surprised by what you saw? Talk to me a little bit about that, because now you've had these conversations, you've talked to these practices. I'm just curious, have any of them stand out in your mind? If so, why?
Yeah, and without getting into specifics, I can tell you now I've been in hundreds of veterinary practices and talked to a large number of owners. And I think what's most interesting to me is the old don't judge a book by its cover. I walk into some practices that look like Taj Mahals, and I walk out of there thinking, place kind of smelled. I didn't like the vibe in there. I'm not sure I would bring my pet there.
Yeah. And
then you go to this little hole in the wall and you just think, these guys are knocking it out of the park. Like, the culture is exceptional. I don't care what the place looks like. And it was really eye-opening. Even within our network, it runs the gamut from large practices that look very impressive from the outside to very small. In fact, our practice is, if you can believe it, 1,800 square feet. We're actually in the process of building a new practice. Again, one of the many benefits of being part of a larger organization is we've got the resources to say, hey, you're busting at the seams here. We need to look for an alternate location. So that's going to be a really exciting change over the next couple of years.
So you go into these practices, and I like that you can't judge a book by its cover. What are the most common questions that the practice owners have for you? What are the things that they care about where they want to talk to another veterinarian?
I think overwhelmingly, because I am a veterinarian, I think they want to know what that transition looks like. I would say the majority of veterinarians who own practices are very invested in their people, right? They feel an overwhelming sense of loyalty from their staff members, and they do legitimately want to take care of them. Obviously, there's a financial side to things as well, but the questions center around what are you going to do to provide a comfortable environment for my staff going forward? And so that's primarily what we talk about. Obviously, I'm pretty well versed in how we structure a deal financially and what things we'll use to go through an evaluation, but I think it's the sort of the ethos of the parent organization that is, at least initially, of the greatest interest. Let me back up a second. One of the things we never want to do as an organization, Andy, is we don't want to buy a practice that one of the associates wants and can purchase. If there's an associate in the practice that wants to be a practice owner, we don't want to get in the way of that. And I think Dan may have mentioned that on his podcast. So if you're an associate and you have interest in practice ownership, I would encourage you to talk to your practice owner about that sooner than later. You can have that be comfortable having that conversation and just sort of opening the door. And if you're not interested, let them know that, hey, when it comes time for you to transition and maybe partner with one of these companies, would it be possible for me to be part of that process? Because I'm really interested. I love working here. I'd love to work here for a long time. And I've got some friends and colleagues that work for company X, Y, or Z, and they're super excited about it. So I'd love to introduce you. I know it's a weird conversation to have if you're a young associate, but you have the ability to advocate for yourself post-transaction instead of it just sort of being blindsided like I was. And no hard feelings towards my previous boss. He was a great guy. I just ran into him a couple of weeks ago. And obviously, it's worked out really well for me, so no complaints whatsoever.
Are there any flags as an associate vet you should look out for that would let you know that maybe you should have this conversation? Because you're right, like, if you were working in a practice and the practice owner is getting near retirement age, I've dealt with a lot of practices, and everybody kind of knows, at some point, we're going to kind of figure out what the next iteration of this is kind of looking like, and nobody is surprised by that. There's other times when you say, the practice owner is in her 40s.
Sure.
You go, should I mention a transition to her? But practice owners in their 40s sell their practices all the time. And so how do you open that conversation? Is there something you could say, I noticed this, or I was just thinking? How do you not make it awkward where you walk in and say, I was just thinking? If something were to happen to you.
It's interesting that you say that. And I might push back a little bit and say, I think most associates don't recognize that for some reason, but it makes sense that they should, right? I mean, any business that's started by somebody that has value is ultimately going to be sold. I mean, that's just the natural order of things, right? And so you have to assume that that's going to happen at some point. And you're right. There are some practice owners who are sort of more entrepreneurial. Maybe they want to open, start, grow, and sell practices as a financial investment, as opposed to growing and curating a deep culture over many years. And so I think that would be more obvious if you're working for a real go-getter and maybe they're opening 1 or 2 or 3 practices in town.
Oh, yeah.
You've got to know the writing's on the wall. And so as an associate, if you like working there and you want to continue, have that conversation the first day you walk in the door. There's nothing wrong with it. And being entrepreneurial, they're going to be very receptive to that conversation.
That totally makes sense to me. This has been really good. It's really wonderful to have someone who's a veterinarian who's sort of seen these transitions from inside and also outside and to answer those types of questions. All that sort of makes sense. I love you speaking to sort of the anxiety part up at the beginning. I think that's just human nature. I love the sort of the settling and people sort of coming into acceptance of kind of where we are and what that's going to be like. It's really helpful to have your insight on kind of what questions do I want to ask to try to understand sort of what I'm in for. Is there any last pieces of advice, Gene, that you would have for, and we've been talking a lot about veterinarians, but honestly, anyone, the practice managers, anyone who's going to stay in this transition period and go through this, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you were like, oh man, I wish I knew this when I started to go through it?
I can tell you that when I went to vet school, Andy, I certainly, if you had asked, do you think this is what your career is going to look like 27 years later, I would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
But I think one last piece of advice I mentioned before, like have an open mind. Obviously, the idea of corporate veterinary ownership is not one that's going away. So a number of young veterinarians are going to work for one company or another.
Oh, yeah.
And so keep an open mind, as we talked about before, but also don't be afraid to say yes. When Dan and Roy asked me, would you be interested in doing this business development thing, asking if I wanted to be medical director? I don't know if I'm going to be good at this, but if you see in me, some skills that you think would translate to helping you grow this larger entity, then I'm all in. And saying yes was probably the best thing that I've ever done as far as, becoming something that I think is meaningful. And we talk about this, trying to change the way that people think about corporate-owned veterinary practices. And, so far so good, as they say. But don't be afraid to say yes, because there's a lot of opportunities out there that you didn't even know existed.
Dr. Gene Bauer, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for talking through this with me. Where can people find you online? Where can they learn more about the process if they're interested in Blue River Pet Care?
Yeah, so any of your listeners, Andy, more than welcome to reach out to me directly at my email, which is gbauer@blueriverpetcare.com. It'll be in the show notes or something, I assume.
It will.
And check out the Blue River Pet Care website, and you can find us on all the socials.
Outstanding. Thanks so much for being here, Gene. Guys, thanks for tuning in and listening, everybody. Thanks for being here. Take care of yourselves, gang. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Andy.
And that's what I got. Guys, thanks for being here. Thanks to Gene for coming and sharing his knowledge. Thanks to Blue River Pet Care for making this thing possible. Boy, they're just good to work with. Anyway, guys, take care of yourselves, gang. I'll talk to you later on.